Welcome to seminar today. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Elise Gornish, who's visiting us from the University of Arizona today. So Dr. Gornish is a cooperative extension specialist in ecological restoration at the University of Arizona. Her work largely focuses on identifying strategies for successful restoration in arid land ecosystems and integration of restoration approaches into weed management. And I will just say that Dr. Gornish, that is a leader in the field of ecological restoration, especially in the Southwest. And I think of her that way. And and is just an exceptional human and does a really good job of engaged scholarship and making her work relevant to communities. So with my pleasure, it is to welcome Dr. Elise Gornish, and please give her a round of applause to welcome her.
Thanks, Carrie. I love that you guys just applauded before the talk. I'm so thrilled to be here, like 2% less thrilled because it's a frozen tundra outside, but I will manage. So what the heck am I going to talk about? Making restoration better. So a couple of years ago, I started the creation of a online portal for ecological restoration. The goal of this portal was to be this kind of one-stop shopping for anyone who might be interested in ecological restoration in Arizona, with the goal of like anyone who was interested, whether it was a backyard gardener or someone from the BLM, if they were thinking about ecological restoration, they could come to this website and get some kind of information. There's a bunch of awesome stuff on it. One of the things on it that people particularly liked is there's this county resource, there's this county resource map, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's resources based on your county, so each county has lists of native plants, restoration practitioners, native plant nurseries, stuff like that. People love this. And they loved it so much, and one of the reasons they loved it is because not only was there targeted local information, but there was also the ability to sort of communicate with local people who were doing things that were relevant to things they were interested in. So that got me thinking, and I was like, all right, restoration, communication, what else can we do here to leverage this? And I came up with this idea. I didn't come up with this idea. Well, I came up with it in my head, but someone's done it before me, which is to have a map of all the restoration projects that were going on in Arizona, so that if you were in, let's say, Cochise County, which is a county in Arizona, you're like, I wonder what kind of restoration projects have been done in this county. Let me check this map, and you could go and see what people were doing and maybe even communicate with them. So you both learn stuff and be able to communicate with people. And everybody loved this idea. People were like, that sounds awesome. So I spent all this time making like a formal document to send to people so they could fill it out and I could start populating this map. I sent it out to a bunch of people. I didn't get any back. What I got back was a lot of people saying, this is an awesome idea, but you know what? This project didn't really work, so I don't want to include it. Or we kind of messed this thing up, so I can't include that. Or we didn't get 100% success. It was just a lot of reasons why people, their projects weren't 100% successful, as they rarely are, and people didn't want to share that information. They were really nervous about talking about mistakes they had made or imperfections. And that's crazy to me, because we all know that we all make mistakes constantly in life, me probably more than others, and particularly in our work. Alexander Pope, this very well-known satirist and poet, and if you did not know, he was also a really cool landscape gardener, has this quote, which I think probably everyone here knows, to err is human. It's totally normal and acceptable and typical and the norm to make mistakes, to do things and deploy projects and have activities that are not perfect. And yet, we don't really talk about it. Right? We don't talk about an ecological restoration. I assume that a lot of people here aren't in restoration, but probably in your fields, people don't talk about their mistakes either. And I think that this is truly problematic. It's problematic because, one, it makes us feel bad when we make mistakes or when we do things that have imperfect outcomes, which is probably all the time. And two, we can't learn from those things because we want to push them aside super quickly instead of actually thinking about what happened and what we can learn from it. And then other people can't learn from it. So this ends today, because today all I'm going to do is tell you guys all about a bunch of mistakes I made. So this is going to be sort of, in one part, a typical talk. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of projects I did, whoop-de-doo. But it's not going to be a typical talk because for each of the projects I talk about, I'm going to tell you how I made a mistake and then what I learned from it. And really my goal here is pretty grand in the sense of, I think all of us, not just people in the field of ecological restoration, that's most of the projects I'm going to talk about because I'm a restoration ecologist, but I think all of us in applied science and maybe science at writ large need to be much more forthcoming about the mistakes we're making because we all do them and it's okay. It's human. And Alexander Pope here is going to help me throughout the talk, okay? So look out for this wonderful face. I love it. When I was Googling like images of Alexander Pope, all of them are like these like girl please faces. I don't know why, but all of them are like, ugh. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of projects I've conducted and the mistakes. Really, we need to continue these conversations because, you know, the best way to learn is to learn from your mistakes, okay? So what kind of mistakes have I made? I've made lots of mistakes, imperfections in my work. I tried to sort of group them for the purposes of this talk. And in general, I've made a lot of assumptions about what works. Part of that probably comes from I've been working in the field of ecological restoration for a while now. I kind of think I'm an expert, but maybe I just don't know as much as I should. Or maybe I'm trusting my own experience too much that I've actually closed my mind to other opportunities or other things that can be happening in the field, okay? Not accommodating uncomfortable truths. I think we've all sort of identified a result in our work and been like, that doesn't make sense. Let me go back to it. Instead of being like, no, I analyzed that correctly. Now what does this actually mean? And of course, overlooking simple for fancy, because fancy usually attracts more money, okay? So, as I said, I'm going to go through a bunch of projects and tell you how I messed up and what I learned from them. And first I'm going to talk about some projects where I made assumption about what works. Now for anyone who doesn't work or constantly think about ecological restoration, particularly in dryland systems like I do, you should know that ecological restoration in general is very, very hard, and particularly in dryland systems. And one of the reasons it's so hard is there's a ton of stuff that drives restoration outcomes, okay? Here's a list of just some of the things. This was kind of like a brain fart. I was just writing stuff down, okay? But from all of these factors that can drive outcomes in ecological restoration, these aren't the only ones. Precipitation is usually the most important, right? All plants need moisture. And in dryland systems, moisture is hard to come by. And so precipitation is far and away the most important thing driving outcomes in ecological restoration. The problem with precipitation is, for the most part, you can't really do anything about it, okay? If you're not using irrigation in your system, you can make predictions about when the rain is going to come, how much rain is going to come. You can attempt to coincide your deployment of your project with the rains, things like that. So you can be strategic, but in general, you can't do anything about precipitation, right? And this is well known. This isn't surprising. Nancy Shackelford and colleagues published this really nice paper in Nature EE, one of the natures, and did this meta-analysis of all these different restoration projects to try to understand what are some of the dominant drivers of restoration success, and found that, yeah, precipitation is pretty important. You know, as you go up in the aridity index, so as you get more moisture, success of restoration increases. Surprise, surprise. But there are other things that are really important for ecological restoration. And luckily, some of these things are things that we can actually modify, okay? So things like plant material, plant type, stuff associated with the plant materials that we're actually deploying on the ground. So I've highlighted some things here. This is showing that as you increase seed rate, as you put more seeds out, you get more plants. Big surprise. This is showing that time since seeding, you get less species. So if you seed again after you seed a year ago, you'll probably get more plants. And this is showing how seed mass, as it increases, you increase species success. And seed ecologists have known this forever. The bigger the seed, the more likely it is to germinate, okay? So this all suggests that other than precipitation, kind of the things that we can have a hand in, sort of the decisions we make associated with management and the design and deployment of restoration should be some of the most important stuff driving ecological restoration. Or that's what I thought. This is actually my first or second PhD student to finish. Maybe my first. I don't know. I got so many. But this was Hannah Farrow was a PhD student in my lab. She finished and she's now a postdoc in USGS. And she worked on a project we did together, but she did all the cool stuff. So anytime I'm talking about a project where there's someone else involved, any good things they did, anything that messed up, it was inevitably me. But Hannah's really interested in natural resource restoration. And so she was working on a natural gas pipeline in the Altar Valley, which is about 45 minutes southwest of Tucson. And so when they install these natural gas pipelines, it's crazy. They like scour the top 3 to 5 centimeters of topsoil, and then they just put it to the side in a big pile. And then they make these huge holes for the pipes, and they cover the holes, and then they take that topsoil and redistribute it, okay? And then it looks something like this. It looks like a moonscape, okay? So Hannah was really interested in identifying how restoration approaches, so how some of these management decisions we make might modify revegetation or restoration outcomes on this natural gas pipeline, okay? So very generally, she had 3 treatments, okay? So she was looking at just how topsoil, so that topsoil redistribution. She was looking at topsoil and then added seeds. That's how she added them. I always do that. Anyway, sorry. Where was I? Topsoil and seeds. So she had a seed mix that was native seeds from the region, and then livestock exclusion, okay? So we went into this, and she told me she was doing this, and I was like, obviously, if you add seeds, it's kind of like well known, or so I thought, in dryland restoration that you cannot wait for the seed bank in the topsoil to revegetate naturally. It takes too long, and usually it's depauperate, okay? So almost always, if you want cover, particularly quickly, you need to seed, okay? So this is what we found. So I'm showing you 2 graphs. Here at the top, we have plant species richness. Here at the bottom, we have total vegetation cover. This is through time, so this is the first year of the experiment, 2015. The experiment ran until 2019. And I'm just showing you here 3 of the treatments. Let's ignore cows for now. We've got our control treatment, so there's no topsoil, no seeding. We have just topsoil here in the middle, and then we have our seeding, okay? And then we just made them different colors because we like that. So what did we find? Okay, in the first year, seeding resulted in significantly more plant species richness and total vegetation cover. Hurrah! That's what we expected. We're so brilliant. No, we're not. What does Alexander Pope see? He sees, oh, well, you can't see that, but that red bar goes all the way across. Essentially, after the first year, there was no difference in any of our vegetation metrics between just topsoil and seeding, okay? And this is important. So we made assumptions about what works, but I mean, people ask me all the time, because I'm cooperative extension, for my recommendations. And prior to this work, I would have always recommended, for short and for long-term outcomes, to do seeding, okay? Seeding is extremely expensive. Native seed is super, super expensive. So if you don't have to do it, which this one study, admittedly, and in one place suggests, then maybe you don't want to do it. But the point of this is that I always thought that seeding was always a good idea. And sometimes it's not, right? So I made a mistake, and I learned. Sometimes I think about scenes like this. So this is these are solar panels in the desert. And so solar panel or sustainable energy production is increasing, and increasingly we're using the desert to install these solar panels. And usually, actually, they don't look like this. Usually they look more like this. And the point of this is that these guys are really, really close to one another. So for the most part, when solar panels are installed, they like nuke the ground, they install the solar panels, and then people usually do not do restoration under these guys. The reason? Because usually these things are so close together that the ground under them is shaded almost all day. And the idea is that native desert plants are adapted to and require direct sunlight, okay? So for a long time, a lot of people, that's both restoration practitioners and folks who work for energy companies, sort of totally put aside the idea of doing native plant restoration under these guys after nuking them, because there's no way that a desert plant that is adapted to and needs, potentially, direct solar insolation could survive under these things. This is a terrible schematic, but it is a schematic of actually the roof of the building that I have my office in. And on the roof, solar panels were installed, okay? So we took this as a cool opportunity to actually test how some plants might do under the solar panels. This whole area is irrigated. So we're giving the plants almost everything they need, except they might not be getting some sunlight. So what we did is we installed permanent plots. I don't know why there's another 4 here. That's a mistake. Is it an Easter egg? I don't know. So we installed 5 plots that were totally under the solar panels. So they were shaded all day. They received no direct sunlight. We installed 5 large plots that were sort of at the edge of the solar panels. So they received direct sunlight like half the day. And then we installed these 5 that were outside of the solar panel. So they were receiving sun all day. Okay? And these are native desert plants, okay? So it looks something like this, and you can see there are, well, I'm like, do you see this? So here's the solar panel, and there are like these really small areas where the solar panels are fitting together. There's some sun, but in general, you're seeing that this is like shaded all the time. And here's some plants. I don't remember why I put that picture in here. I'm not gonna show you a graph, I'm just gonna show you a picture. There's the picture. There's a lot going on over here. There's a little bit going on over here, and there's nothing going on over here, okay? And so this is actually, because I'm very new in the world of like natural, sustainable natural resource extraction, restoration, but there's not that much information on it. So this was very new to find and very surprising to everyone involved. We're like, how in the hell do you have native desert species that are shaded essentially all day, doing okay, and you don't have anything growing over here. Well, there's a little bit, but there's like clearly a difference in cover and in biomass, okay? So again, I made an assumption about what works. Before this study, and this is just in the first year, and it's a very small study and extremely contrived, but before this, if anyone would have asked me, and people have asked me about restoring under these things, I would have been like, nah, you probably can, you know, restore some other place and it's better, okay? So I was making assumptions about what works. Here's another example. I am part, and Carrie is as well, of a restoration network called RestoreNet, and it's largely managed by USGS, and it's this awesome, if you don't know about it, it's awesome. It's this sort of coordinated network of sites where we are deploying a series of commonly used restoration approaches, but across sites that span a gradient of aridity. So essentially we're trying to see, like, does something that work over here work down here, okay? And there's a lot of stuff going on. This is like a crazy schematic, but I want you to ignore what's over here. At some of the sites, in addition to seeding, there was planting. And essentially all I want you to get from this is the planting happened 2 ways. There were either monocultures of species or polycultures, okay? So Ben Yang, who is a student in, he's actually not my student, I'm on his committee, but Ben Yang was doing a bunch of work, and he wanted to know, he came up to me and he was like, he's really into soils. And he's like, I wonder how the soils differ under those 2 different treatments. I was like, well, obviously there's more diversity in the soil microbiome under the polyculture, because that was my assumption. And he's like, well, let's test it. And I was like, you're wasting your time. Was he? So what he did is he asked the question, does restoration of plant diversity trigger concomitant soil microbiome changes in dryland ecosystems? You can tell I practice this thought. And so what it looked like is we had a series of sites, and the colors, although they're not relevant to this talk, but they're on the graph, I'll just tell you. Blue sites are places where species were planted when they were in the cold, they were planted into colder regions than they're typically used to. Green is when they're planted into regions they're typically associated with. And then red is they were planted into areas that are hotter. It's not relevant to the talk, but it's on the map, so I'm explaining it. And again, at all of these sites, there were a bunch of planted plants. But the only thing you need to remember is that some of the plots had only 1 species, so they were monocultures. And some of them had 4 species, so they were polycultures. And they were planted kind of like this. And Ben went and sampled the soil across the plot. And what do you think he found? Not what I assumed. So at the top, I can't see this. At the top we have bacterial richness at the 16S across our different sites, and at the bottom it's fungal richness. Okay, so he was looking at the soil microbiome, he was sequencing everything. And the different colors again are those heat intensities, but you don't need to worry about it. What I want you to pay attention to is that each of these bars is in a pair. So the bar on the left side of the pair is the monoculture, 1 species, and the bar on the right side of the pair is the polyculture. And in general, we found that there was no effect, and given this is 1 or 2 years after planting, There was no effect of diversity above ground, below ground. Okay? We found this also when we ran NMDS. So for anyone who's not familiar with NMDS, essentially you can get a bunch of community data, and so we're using sequencing data. So you get in each sample who's there and how much of them there are. So you have a bunch of information. NMDS essentially concatenates all that information down into two numbers, an x and a y coordinate. And any 2 points on this graph that are closer together just suggest that the microbiome community are more similar. Any points that are farther apart suggest that microbiome community is more dissimilar. And we expected that microbiome communities under polycultures would be more like each other and would be more dissimilar from monocultures. And that's not what we found at all. What was important only was location, okay? So this is against like basic diversity expectations in ecology, right? Now given this was in very, very early on, so this might change in 5 or 10 years after the plants start getting big. But I mean, we expected in general that even short term having a diversity of plants above ground would change the diversity below ground. And it was not. Look at him. He's done with my crap here. So more above ground diversity did not, in the short term, result in more below ground diversity. Again, I made this assumption, and people ask me all the time how they can enhance soil health. Okay? Diversifying your soil microbiome and increasing the biomass of your soil microbiome is a proxy for enhancing soil health. We can discuss that later if you don't agree, and that'd be great. And because of this, I would tell people, plant a diversity of plants, you get short-term increased soil health. Not all the time, okay? Okay, in addition to making assumptions about what works, I also make mistakes by not accommodating uncomfortable truths. So this is where I do a lot of my work. It's the beautiful Sonoran Desert that's so gorgeous, not all the time. So sometimes the Sonoran Desert looks really messed up, particularly on the border between the US and Mexico, where there's almost 2,000 miles of border fence. So when border fences are installed, not only they make this 20 some odd meter sort of bare area on both sides of the fences. It's called a view shed. It helps, I guess, see people. So there's all this damage that occurs right at the border fence, but then there's also damage that occurs sort of akimbo to that, if you will, where, you know, big machinery is driving around or they're stockpiling construction materials, okay? So border wall construction is really bad for our native Sonoran Desert. Amy Gill, who's right here, Amy was my master's student. She's fabulous and I love her, and if you don't know her, get to know her, she's great. Amy was interested in this, and so Amy conducted a study in the Coronado National Monument, where in 2008, part of the border wall was installed and resulted in the loss of at least 4,000 agave palmaris. Agave palmaris is a native agave to the Sonoran Desert. It's super, super important. So it's super important environmentally. So it resists fire because there's a lot of water inside of it, and it produces food for an endangered lesser long-nosed bat. It's important socially, so a lot of the native people around there use it for cultural purposes, and it's important economically. People use it for making mezcal, okay? So it's a super important species. And you can actually see right here, this is a Google view, but you can see these like little lines. This is actually where she did her experiment. In collaboration with a bunch of folks, she conducted an experiment of restoration of agave, and the goal was to understand biotic and abiotic factors that are important for agave. I guess it probably says restoration right there, okay? So what she did is she planted a bunch of agave pups. These are 3 or 4 year old agaves. They grow super slowly because they're succulents. And then she implemented a bunch of treatments. So one was shading. She did not use umbrellas. It was shade cloth that was, I think, 50 to 80% shade cloth, you know, elevated off the ground like this much. There was herbivore exclusion, but mostly it was for javelinas. So that was conducted by installing chicken wire fencing around the plants. And then there was weed control. So this entire experiment was deployed in a super invaded habitat invaded by Lehman's lovegrass, which is this perennial grass that was brought in by the USDA, thanks USDA, during the Dust Bowl to accommodate for forage loss, and it's gone widely out of where it was planted. It's bad news, man. So this guy was everywhere, and so Amy removed it in 2 different ways. She did weed eating and herbicide, okay? And then there was crosses of all these. this is what we found. So the top graph is the number of live agaves, and the bottom graph is the number of leaves across our different treatments. Okay? So in general, what did we find? Well, there were a couple of treatments, mostly involving herbivore exclusion and shading, that really resulted in significantly higher survival of the agave pups and growth. Cool. That seems reasonable, right? The shading is going to protect those vulnerable little pups from the desiccation stress that can occur from direct solar insolation, and obviously these plants probably like it if they're not being nibbled on by javelina. Okay, that's fine. What else did we find? We found that in the 2 plots where we removed the invasive grass, this super aggressive invasive grass, the survival of the agave was lower, in one case significantly lower. Okay? He sees that. Now this was really weird because we were like, wait, you remove a weed and it's bad for the plant? And we went around and around. We're trying to figure out, like, did we do something wrong? How do we play? Because essentially we were like, are we going to recommend that people don't remove weeds? Are sometimes weeds not bad? Or maybe are there sometimes cases where your resources are best put elsewhere than getting rid of them? Yes, and I'm not the only one, we're not the only one to say it. This is just a recent paper that came out that there's a lot going on here, but essentially the paper was looking at the value of natives or weeds for pollinators. And this is showing, here's the natives in orange and here's the weeds. I love how they call them injurious. It's like injurious weeds. And the number of flower visitors, so the number of different things that are visiting the flowers. And over here is the diversity index of the things that are visiting. And you can see that a lot of things visit weeds, okay? They're serving some kind of purpose. Now, I'm not saying they're serving a purpose because they knocked out the natives that should be there. That's not what I'm saying. But right here, they're serving a purpose. And here, these weeds are actually serving a purpose for our agave pups, okay? They were probably shading them, so protecting them from that desiccation stress that can come with solar insolation. And probably because the ones that were surviving had less munches out of them from the javelinas, probably actually hiding them from those javelinas. So we had this really weird thing that we were going around and around just because we didn't want to accommodate this uncomfortable truth of, like, maybe in some situations, weeds aren't that bad. We certainly are not going to start advocating for people to start planting these things. But now, after this, it does occur to me that there are certain situations where maybe it would be a better use of your resources to take the resources that you have earmarked for weed control and put it somewhere else. And particularly in the Sonoran Desert, weed control can be like 50 to 60% of the total cost or your total budget, okay? So 50 to 60% in this case, not only are you spending most of your budget on weed removal, but probably you're going to lose most of those plants you bought. And agaves are expensive, okay? So this was really interesting to think about. Okay, and last, I think I just have one example, but overlooking simple for fancy. So this is Arizona, in case you didn't pick that up. And the I-10 is an important road that traverses the United States from west to east, okay? It connects California to, California's here, to Florida, okay? So it goes west to east. But it goes north to south in one little part of the United States, and that's between Tucson, Arizona, where I live and play, and Phoenix, the capital, okay? And a lot of people die on this road. It's like one of the highest mortalities of like all the roads anywhere. You know why? Because a lot of times it looks like this, and this isn't even bad. So the whole road is flanked. It's like 86 miles between Tucson and Phoenix. It's flanked by abandoned ag land. And so I mean, this just looks like, I see this picture and I'm like, wah, 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 wah. No? Okay. Whatever. So there's just like nothing out there. There's no plants. There's like nothing. The dirt is essentially inert, and it's really hard to even grow anything. People have spent a lot of money trying to revegetate both sides. So Arizona Department of Transportation, and because of this, so there's no plants there holding onto the soil. A lot of that soil starts coming up in these dust storms, and then you can have like less than 2 feet of visibility on this road. And every year, like 80 people die from this. I mean, it's tragic and it's totally preventable. And so Arizona Department of Transportation has spent a lot of money trying to revegetate these areas, and they have not been successful. Their restoration approaches for dust mitigation specifically usually focuses only on the physics and chemistry of that topsoil, and it's clearly failing. So Arizona Department of Transportation came to me and was like, what should we do? And I'm like, we gonna get fancy. I'm gonna get people from atmospheric physics and soil physics and soil blah, 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 and we're gonna get this ragtag, or an A-team. A-team is better than ragtag team, right? We're gonna get this like great team of crazy thinkers together, and we're gonna do all this crazy stuff, and we're gonna solve this problem with really expensive approaches. And the first thing we thought was like, okay, these lands have not had plants on them for a long time. The soils are essentially inert. We need to get something in the soil to like have any chance to get plants to grow, right? So let's do soil inoculation. So the test was to inoculate the soil with these different commercially available inoculants. We spent a lot of money, not only in the inoculants, but we did all this like instrumenting of the soil. It was super expensive for a very small plot. And I can't tell you which of these pictures is from the control and which of these pictures is from the one of the inoculation. The inoculations totally failed. We totally failed in that experiment. Or did we? Where are the plants in this picture? Alexander Pope season. It's right near the fence, which shouldn't be a surprise to me because I've been working in this system forever. What's going on here is that water moves through these systems, because this is the monsoonal system. Water hits this structure, it drops all the seeds and the organic material it's holding. This structure now has this nice little organically rich nursery for seeds. It's got all these seeds, and the structure itself is shading the soil surface just a little bit, and things start growing, and it's a little harder for animals to get their heads in there and eat them, okay? But I didn't think about that. But this has been done forever in arid land restoration. These are pictures from my own work, and I ignored it. So people have been doing above ground structures on flat, degraded areas forever. I mean, there's evidence in in Arizona from like 4,000 years ago, people using these structures of rocks or branch piles to do the exact same thing, to shade the soil surface and to act at these like road bumps for water, to drop the seeds, drop the plant material, drop the organic material. And I mean, I work currently on studies that look at this. This is called a CONMOD, and we're testing CONMODs in that restoration, that coordinated network I told you about, RestoreNet. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but I guess this is Arizona. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we're testing these CONMODs. They're really small. They're just these chicken wire little X's, and you put them out on the landscape, and the same thing happens. Wind blows, water moves, and stuff gets stuck here, and stuff grows. So why didn't I think of that for this experiment? Because it's not fancy. So I'm not saying that, this is the golden ticket for this. I mean, this, belies how big this area is. So I don't necessarily think you can put out fencing or rocks or CONMODs to address all of the problems associated with this. But it was crazy to me that I'm actively involved in work using above ground structures in situations just like this, and I totally ignored it because I was so focused on spending, I don't know how much this is, like $900 on these stupid things to instrument these plots and put in stuff into the soil, inoculations, when I was ignoring stuff that I knew that worked, or maybe could have been working in tandem, okay? So ignoring simple for fancy, that's something that I came up with. And that's particularly problematic because I work with practitioners. So I work with people on the ground, okay? Practitioners don't usually have the money for this instrumentation and don't usually have the money for inoculations. They're really expensive. But they do have fencing. They do use rock. They do use branches. So I was even thinking not only about stuff that might have been too fancy for this, but I was thinking about approaches that most people wouldn't even be able to use in their own landscapes. Okay, hopefully I've gone through enough of my mistakes. I've made many more. But I think, and I tried to, I don't even know what time it is, but I tried to make this a little shorter because I really wanted to talk, I was hoping we could have kind of a discussion about it, but I really want to just drive home this thing that I think we all know, which is we all make mistakes, we all deploy management or just research that is imperfect, and it's okay, and you can learn from it, and it's really important. We should be talking about it more. I want there to be like a journal of applied management of failure or something like that, where we can just submit our work and be like, this didn't work, and this is what I learned from it. Yeah, I might have had a better way to say it, but yeah, just remember, mistakes are really common. They're the norm. They're the rule. They're not the exception. And we can learn from them. We can leverage them and do other cool stuff. And so I just am advocating for us all to really start talking more about our mistakes and making sure that we realize that it's okay and that there are opportunities to leverage for more knowledge. So follow me on Twitter. And I'd love to take any questions, but I was hoping that this could be kind of like a conversation. And there's something in the chat. I don't know if it's a question or should I check?
Oh, yeah. I was posting a couple comments.
Oh, okay.
Ask for
You're like, this is the best ever.
So, A, you should follow her on Twitter. It's very entertaining. And B, that was awesome. That was really great talk. And I feel like we all need a poster of Alexander Pope on our wall.
Right?
Like
with his face, it's like, girl, please.
I'm thinking about Alexander Pope always now for every grant proposal and paper I ever write. So, what questions do we have in the audience for Dr. Gornish? Covered a lot of ground, lots to talk about.
Yes.
For the Zoom.
So thank you for the talk. I was wondering, with like incorporating admitting to your mistakes, if you're working with stakeholders, how do you approach that in such a way that you don't look like a rube?
Dumbass?
Yeah.
A
You don't look
rube?
like a rube.
Are you from like 1790? Yes. I would love to be called a rube.
So you look like you actually know
Yeah.
what you're doing
Yeah.
when you're approaching like ranchers who have been on this land for decades, or native tribes who have been on this land for centuries.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm coming in with my science,
Yeah.
and I know nothing.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Is
and
your
I
mic on?
Oh, yes. Hello?
This
Hello?
one has to be off for that one to
Oh.
work as well, I think.
It's on. It's got the little light. I'll try it. Hello?
Yes, thank you.
There.
That helps.
Hello. Okay. That's a great question. I hate that phrase, but that's really a great question. So, my thing that I usually do is I make very clear with stakeholders and really anybody that science is complex, but not like the science is too complex for you to understand. It's just like there's so much site-based specificity in everything that I make very clear before, like, well, this thing that I did over there on your neighbor's ranch worked, but that was 2 years ago on your neighbor's ranch. They have horses, you have cows, they have clay soils, you have loamy soils. There were butterflies over there, there's no butterflies over here. I don't know. And so that kind of saves me because it's true, but it's also like context dependency is rife, or ecology is rife with context dependency, right? And so keeping that in mind, you almost don't get surprised when stuff doesn't work the way you think because you're like, nah, it's context dependency, you know, or like it's this year, it's a year effect, or it's randomness, or whatever. But stakeholders appreciate that, and usually I don't want to say they buy it because it's true, but like they understand it because whatever they're doing, whether they're a rancher, they know like the forage last year was different than this year because of the rain, but also because like some horses got in their landscape or whatever, there's all this stuff going on. So I think remembering that, and that probably has to do with a lot of this, right? I mean, I make assumptions about things because of what I've known from the past. Like, I don't want this to be like, don't trust yourself or don't trust your knowledge because, you know, you make assumptions, we make hypotheses, right, in science based on like available knowledge. But we also know that like stuff goes weird and sometimes you know why and sometimes you don't. So it's a loquacious answer, but context dependency, everywhere. Was there something in the back? No? Yes?
You have to turn your mic up.
Oh.
And I have to turn it, so we have to
Oh
like
boy.
pick a comment. Sorry.
It's simple.
What about that?
For you, maybe.
I had a thank you for the talk, by the way. It was really, really fun. I really appreciated it. I had a very similar question, which is why I almost didn't ask this. But I guess what is kind of in your experience the best way when you are communicating with managers, stakeholders, to kind of address the uncertainty in the science without losing credibility, or is it easier to fall into the trap of sort of pretending like there is more certainty than there is, and then like having that kind of backfire on you? Kind of what situation is more common, and like what do you do to combat that?
So, as a cooperative extension specialist, my job is to communicate with non-scientists. So I'm very good at it because I get paid to do it and I practice it. And this is going to go on a little bit of a tangent, but come with me because I'm going to get to your question. And I think it's important that I'm good at it because when I talk to stakeholders, I can communicate difficult things. And we, on the world, we're like, people don't understand climate change because scientists, because it's too complex, and that is BS. It's because scientists are very bad at communicating the science, okay? So I have found that I don't talk down to anyone. I understand who I'm talking to and use terms. So for example, I don't use the word climate change with ranchers, I use the word drought. I'm not dumbing down anything, that's just a term. But people understand complexity. You just need to be effective in how you explain it, okay? And so I'm very lucky because I have the best job ever as cooperative extension, and I'm supposed to communicate, and so I'm good at it because I practice it and I'm paid to do it. And so I have found that people understand that, and in understanding it, they know it's not that I'm an idiot. They're like, yeah, the site's weird, or like stuff was different last year than this year, or was different last month, or I had a smaller number of cows this year than last year. So people understand. It's our fault. It's the researcher's fault if people don't understand. It's not that anything is too complex. Okay. Yeah, we need to do a better job as a scientific community communicating to non-scientists, all of us. It's our fault if they don't understand.
Other questions?
Yeah, thanks. Some of that reminded me of like a biological crust. I think I met Jane Belknap many years ago. So how big a play are they for preventing erosion and dust, and how difficult is it to reestablish those guys?
The question was about biological crust. Hello? Okay, the question was about biological crust. Biological crusts are amazing, and they work very well. The problem is getting them to grow at scale. So they grow extremely slowly, and so there's people like Jane Belknap or Matthew Bowker who are trying to figure out how to like actually make these like marketable, like how do you grow these things to like sell, to give to people? And they're hard. They're like very finicky in the greenhouse, and then when you get them, you get like a patch this big, and then you'll get effects from that, but they're small. It's just, I think it's more on getting it at scale, but they're extremely effective at replenishing the nutrients and the soil microbial communities that need to be in the soil that the plants need, and holding onto the soil. But most people need to, revegetate it like plots that are larger than, meter squared or whatever. And that's a problem with a lot of approaches, that they work, in the small scale, and it's like, how do you get up to larger management relevant scales?
Hello. Yeah, I guess you talked a lot about kind of experimental design errors or interpretation errors. But I was wondering, how do you make people comfortable with analytical or statistical errors? And then kind of related to that, like, how would your hypothetical journal of errors deal with that?
I've never made a statistical error in my life. I don't know if I've ever done stats correctly. I'm somewhere in the middle there. Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, I don't know. So, I don't know. I try to do my stats right, and at this point, because I'm tenured, I have lots of people do it for me now. That's just how it goes. But before I was tenured and I was doing it, I would have someone else look at it. But I think that itself, there's a whole, which I'm sure you're aware of this like world of discussion about proper ways to analyze data, and there's no like wrong way, but there's like better ways, and does it matter? And I don't know. I think my journal would probably be less concerned about like p-values and all that stuff. I mean, I think there's a value in p-values because it's kind of this baseline that we all understand the same thing in alpha. But you know, when you have a p-value and it's like this, like what does that mean? So I think paying less attention to p-values and like looking at what the data is suggesting is useful, but I don't know if I have a good answer for that. John Mola, asking the hard-hitting questions. Yeah.
For those,
Yeah.
for those of us who are like newer to graduate school, how would you separate like making assumptions versus just kind of not knowing things or needing to do more research?
Oh boy.
Well, grad school makes you not trust yourself and think yourself as stupid. And so I would say always trust yourself and know that you know more than you think. But these are terrible answers because I'm like, man, I can't give you an answer. So I would say you always know more than you think and be confident in how you feel. But there's like, once you know, it's one of those things like, there's the stuff you know, there's the stuff you don't know, and then there's the ocean of stuff you don't know that you don't know. And grad school just like gives you binoculars so you can see farther into the ocean, right? So you learn that there's like celestial body size things that you don't know. And I think once you become comfortable with that, and you're like, I don't know, like that is so thrilling to just be like, I don't know, and not feel bad about it or stupid about it. It's like, you hit a level, you're like the boss, okay? You're just like, I don't know, and that's cool. So I think being comfortable with like, well, I read this paper, I think, and then just being like, yeah, I read this paper, and that's gonna help me form this opinion, blah, blah. But then when you wade into somewhere where you don't know, just be like, well, I don't know. So my answer is that you should be confident in yourself, even though grad school is going to try its best to like break your confidence and then set it on fire in front of you. Be confident in yourself, but also like love the fact that there's so much stuff out there that you don't know, and then be comfortable being like, I don't know. I mean, that's what prelims is all about, you guys, for anyone who hasn't gone through prelims. It's this scary thing. They just want to like throw you against the wall, so you're like, I don't know, and then that's okay. And you're like, oh my God, I survived it. So yes.
Okay, I had someone who just had my oral prelims on Monday. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, how do you feel?
I guess kind of going back to being upfront about your kind of mistakes through the methodology. So I'm trying to come to terms with like methodological errors that I have in my paper or my like past 2 years of research, and now trying to like formulate it into a paper. How do you have like any tips of like, because it seems like this is something that you put in like the methods and like discussion section, but I feel like a lot of papers that I read kind of glimpse over that.
Oh, yeah.
So, but like, give me tips.
You guys, let me tell you something. In a paper where they're like, this thing was on ice for 9 hours. Why do you think it was 9 hours? Because the person went home, had dinner, and then came back and like took it off of ice, okay? In my undergrad, and Mola, I think you were out at this site, I had this huge demography experiment out in this forest that they did prescribed burns, and they promised me that my site wouldn't be burned. And one day I go out there, my site was burned, and it sucked. You know what happened? That turned into a fire treatment, okay? And I published that paper. So like, there's two ways you can address it. Mistakes happen, and you can do what I think most researchers do, or the most researchers that are like, I don't give a fig or whatever, is like, you kind of gloss over it and you don't lie about it, but you're like, I did this, and then not say why. Or you can see what you can learn from it and just be like, all right, well, I took this thing out too early. Like, what does that mean? you know? So everything's an opportunity. And I think you can, anyway, the way I was successful in grad school is that I saw everything as an opportunity and I leveraged the hell out of everything. So like, something happens, like, you know, your experiment is burned to the ground, well, that's a fire treatment. Or like, you know, someone sprays all your plants in the greenhouse, that's a herbicide treatment, you know? You took something out too early and it didn't work, well, like, write a small methods paper on what you did and then restart it. You know, everything's an opportunity.
I'm going to steal right before Amy for a second, but I was wondering, a lot of the folks in the room and joining us remotely may or may not know exactly what cooperative extension is and does. I was wondering if you could just give us kind of an intro to what cooperative extension is and why you chose that path and kind of what that path looks like. That's a lot of questions.
So cooperative extension is literally the best job, okay? So the 40-second thing is like 150 years ago, the US government gave a bunch of money to each state to start what is known as a land grant institution. Most states have one, some states have more than one. The purpose of that land grant institution was to do research that was directly relevant to stakeholders in the state. And back 150 years ago, about 60% of those stakeholders were farmers and ranchers, okay? So doing research that's directly relevant to stakeholders. A couple years after that, cooperative extension was made. We are the people that deliver that mission, okay? So we are the people that make sure that the stakeholders who have questions about anything have access to science. So my main job is to go out and find stakeholders, and stakeholders for me are anybody that are interested in land management. Find out what their needs are. What are their questions? What species should I plant? How do I get rid of this weed? What do I do about drought? My cow smells. I mean, any kind of questions. And then often I do the science, and often in collaboration with those people, to get the answer to the questions, and then I deliver that science to them. So that means, I write peer-reviewed publications and it goes off into the ether with like some scientists read it. But what I do is I take those results and then I deliver them back to stakeholders through outreach. So that's blog posts or Twitter or email blasts or workshops or presentations. Anyway, I have a very, very diverse set of outreach to like match my diverse stakeholder group, okay? So I get paid to do the science, but I also get paid to do the cool thing, which is the outreach, which is to get that science to the people who actually use it. So they want to hear what I have to say, unlike sometimes some college students. So I don't teach. So I get all the benefits of being in a university. I can do whatever I want all the time. I have an awesome lab, and I have some of the requirements associated with the university. I need to publish and get grants and blah, blah, but I don't have to teach because I'm expected to do outreach. So I'm rewarded for doing the thing that actually, as corny as it sounds, makes me feel good about what I do. It's the best job, you get paid really well, most people don't know about it. And cooperative extension, they're in every state, and there's tons of different specialties people focus on. I'm restoration ecology, but I'm special, there aren't many of us. But there's people that do livestock, and range, and natural resources, and 4-H, and community health, and weeds, and the list goes on. And really what you need to do is you do the science and then you deliver the science to the end user. It's the best job ever. And how I got here, I'm a very good communicator, as you can probably tell. So if you're like a weirdo scientist, like we all are, but you need to be able to communicate with people, okay? And that's something you can learn. And you have to get experience doing outreach of some kind, which at your stage could be like writing a blog post. That is outreach, okay? Anything that gets science into the hands of non-scientists is outreach, okay? I think that was all yours.
Thanks, Elise.
Is it on? Yeah, I think so. So I don't know where this question will go, so I'll see where it goes.
Awesome.
I was just attending a talk on mine reclamation, and there was this person from USGS, and their team was just like planting for like 14 years. They have a seed mix, and recently decided to change it, and her statement was, not saying that,
I was in the talk, I know.
yeah, so that we just changed it because it was like, there was no reason for changing it, but we just changed it. But they were all geologists, none of them was ecologists. So when it comes to like applied restoration projects, how do you convince like scientific community itself to like change the regime and like, accept the thing that monocultures are, so I'm not giving a lot of context, it's because you were in the talk as well, but how do you convince the scientific community or the stakeholders that make those decisions? Do you have inputs on that?
So the question, as I understand it, is essentially how do you convince people to change their behavior on the ground? And I'm not going to talk about scientists because who knows what they do. But the stakeholders, so stakeholders have livelihoods that they care about. So everything needs to be turned into money, which that's totally okay. Okay? And so if you're talking to a rancher and you say this works better, do this, they're going to be like, why? Well, this will produce more forage, which will put more weight on your cows, which will bring you more money. Okay? This will enhance soil health, which will grow more crops, which will bring you more money. So that's how I talk about everything. And so I know that there's a big debate in sort of ecology about greenwashing and the role of sort of capitalism in ecology. And I'm all for it because money is how the public understands things. That's how all we understand things as well. But when if you want to give people a tangible thing to use as a benchmark, money is great. Okay? You want to talk about clean water? If that person has never had to search for clean water before, it's going to be really hard to convince them why clean water is so important because they've always had it. But everybody's like wanting to buy something and hasn't had money in their pocket for it. So it's like the great equalizer, right? Money.
Alright, I'm not sure, where are we at with time? A few more minutes, couple more questions?
Thank you for the talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so restoration sort of, in simple terms, implies going back to some state. How can we better incorporate techniques that consider future conditions which might be totally different than prior conditions?
Restoration.
Hold on your butts. I got like a 4-hour answer for that. But this is a great question. And it's like a big question in the restoration community. So you have to do restoration a different way. So essentially you're asking how do you do restoration either in a novel ecosystem or expecting novel ecosystems. And for me, the answer is simple. You think about what will survive of your natives or what's close to your natives and you plant those. That answer drives people insane. Because essentially what you're recommending, or what I would recommend, is these species, this area, you don't have any plants because they're all dying because it's too hot and too dry. Okay? So if you want to get back to what it was, you seed those species and they'll die. It's a waste of money. What you should do is seed the native from 50 miles south of here that has a higher drought tolerance, seed that in. But essentially then, what you're recommending is seeding a non-native. And I've had people stand up. I had someone at a job talk. I gave a job talk at UC Davis. Someone stand up in the room and start yelling at me. I mean, people get very, very emotional about this stuff. But it's this new thing, right? So restoration as a field hasn't been around that, as a formalized field, hasn't been around that long. But still, this idea of like, all right, we need to change sort of the definition of restoration. People lose their minds. And I don't know how to convince people other than maybe showing them data, but there's people that this is emotional, so data isn't going to do anything. I actually got funding. I used to be at UC Davis, and then I moved to University of Arizona. Before I left Davis, I got funding to do this experiment. So there were all these degraded areas across California, and I said I was going to start doing just a common garden of planting things in the upper range of their drought and temperature tolerance, blah, 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 blah. And these were all going to be natives, okay? I had to give back the money because no one would let me do the experiment on their land. No one would let me seed natives from 100 miles south onto a 1 meter squared plot, even if I said I would write something where I would cut off all the seed heads and everything. Nobody would let me do that because people are terrified. I mean, tamarisk is something we brought in and planted everywhere, right? Buffalo grass is something we brought in and planted everywhere. The Russian thistle, well, we didn't plant that, it got out by itself. But I mean, we have a pretty poor track record of putting things where they shouldn't be. However, I think that the climate change emergency is that it's an emergency and thus requires like a very different set of behaviors than what we've done. But that's just me personally, and this is like a debate. But it's something we have to think about. If you're just going to plant the stuff that died because it's too dry, That's a waste. And we're seeing that all over the Southwest. People have their like workhorse mixes that they've been using for like 25 years. They know where to find the species. They've been using them forever, and they're not working anymore. And they keep putting them in and keep spending the money, and it's just a waste of money. And you know, when you don't have stuff growing, you're messing up the soil, weeds come in, you know, while we're waiting, while we're like pussyfooting around, things are getting worse. So.
Another couple questions? One or two? One, just the one.
Ooh. Yeah, and the blue, you got another one?
Were you implying that buffalo grass is not a native?
Buffalo grass.
Oh, buffalo. I just say I got buffalo grass in my yard. I'm
Yeah,
all proud of it,
no.
like, oh,
Buffalo grass.
Okay.
It's from South Africa.
Okay.
Might have room for one more question.
All right.
One.
For anyone that, oh, go for it.
Last question.
What is the favorite mistake you've ever made that did not make this talk?
My husband. Just kidding, baby. I don't know if he's watching. Love you. He's not. No.
You backed the truck into the fence?
You did that. John Mullo was helping me out in the field, and he wasn't paying attention, and I backed a truck into a fence because he was supposed to be telling me where to go. I will say that I've made, particularly when I was in grad school and I wanted to show that I was invincible, I made lots of mistakes and didn't tell anybody, and then these things started piling up on top, and then things got really bad, and I would have to go to my advisor and be like, so this thing is like burning, and so I couldn't tell you, there's many, many examples of that, but, so I couldn't point to one, but it was when I was younger and less sure of myself, I didn't talk about my mistakes, and they just got bad. So, yeah, I wish I had a better story. I probably have a better story. Oh, here's a mistake. Okay, so many years ago, I was working in Tall Timbers Research Station, the place where there was the fire that shouldn't have been in the fire. And my truck got stuck in the mud. And so I had to walk all the way out. I called my boyfriend at the time, like, you gotta come pick me up. And I walk all the way out, and for a long time I needed glasses, but I refused to wear them, so I couldn't see anything. And so I'm walking, and I like can't really see anything. And I get to the place where he said he was going to come and pick me up, and I wanted to sit and wait for him because I was very tired because I just like hiked out of this forest. But in Florida, there's lots of biting ants, so I didn't want to sit right on the ground because I was just going to get bitten. So without wearing anything, this is more just my own stupidity. Now I realize this isn't about a mistake, but I'm on the ground and I'm looking around for a log to sit on, because then maybe that would have been distance between like my munchable skin and the ants. And I'm like just on the ground like this because I can't see anything because I refused to wear glasses for years. And something very, very deep inside me was like, you're in danger. And I looked, and Florida has a lot of poisonous snakes, and there was a cottonmouth, and those things will mess up your day. There was a cottonmouth coiled agape, okay, and that's right before they strike, right next to me. And it's really interesting. Now I know that there's like definitely this like sixth sense, because my body was like, shit's gonna get bad. But I hadn't seen it. And I look, and the thing, and it was like agape, and I was just like, ah! And the second I made that noise, it was like, whoops. And I threw myself, and I didn't get bitten, because if I did, half my face would be gone right now. That's the stupid thing I did that probably is a mistake, but not too long after that, I started wearing glasses more regularly. So, something I just want to say, if anyone's really interested in cooperative extension, I've written a couple things on like why cooperative extension is so cool and how to get a cooperative extension job. When we fly cooperative extension jobs, we often get like 30 people apply, which if you compare that to like a traditional faculty job, like 130 people apply, okay? And so a lot of people don't know about cooperative extension. A lot of people come up to me, they're like, I like research, I don't like teaching, like I want to work with stakeholders. I'm like, that's cooperative extension. So if anything I said is of interest, check out my publications, just find cooperative extension, read them, and you know, feel free to reach out to me, but it's really like the best job. The best job. And thank you. And send me an email. My email's not on there, of course not. Go to my website, you can send find my email, or I'm the only Elise Gornish on earth, so you can Google me and send me an email if you have any questions.
Let's